Prince Edmund stood in the doorway of his daughter's bedroom, his hand frozen on the brass doorknob. The morning light filtered through rose-colored curtains, casting everything in an unsettling pink glow that made his stomach twist. Princess Lydia's room looked exactly as it should. Toys scattered across Persian rugs, books stacked beside her canopy bed, stuffed animals arranged with the careful precision only an 8-year-old could manage. But something was wrong. His eyes moved across the familiar landscape of childhood chaos, searching for what had triggered every parental alarm bell in his head. The morning had started normally enough. Coffee with Catherine in the breakfast room, discussion of the day's appointments, the usual comfortable rhythm of royal domestic life. Then, Lydia's governess, Miss Hartwell, had approached with that particular expression servants wear when they've discovered something they shouldn't have. "Your Highness," she'd whispered, wringing her hands. "Perhaps you should see Princess Lydia's room. She's been drawing again." Edmund moved deeper into the room, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. Drawing. Such an innocent word. Children drew constantly, horses and castles and stick figures of their families. But Miss Hartwell's tone suggested something far from innocent. The drawings were everywhere, taped to the walls, scattered across her desk, tucked between books, hidden behind picture frames. At first glance, they appeared to be typical child's artwork, crude figures in crayon and marker, the kind of thing that usually earned praise and a place on the refrigerator. But as Edmund's eyes adjusted to what he was seeing, his breath caught in his throat. Every single drawing depicted the same scene. A man in a dark coat, standing in shadows. A woman lying on the ground, red crayon seeping from her body like spilled wine. And, in the corner of each drawing, a small figure watching from behind a tree, behind a door, behind a window. The watching figure had yellow hair, just like Lydia's, drawn with the same careful attention to detail that his daughter applied to everything she created. Edmund picked up the nearest drawing with trembling hands. The paper was worn soft from handling, edges frayed as if it had been folded and unfolded countless times. The red crayon had been pressed so hard in places that it had torn through the paper, leaving jagged wounds in the drawing itself. His mind raced backward, searching his memory for any explanation. Lydia had never witnessed violence. Their life was carefully orchestrated, protected, insulated from anything that might disturb a child's sleep. Palace security was absolute. The nannies were vetted, the staff trusted, the daily routine as predictable as clockwork. Yet here were dozens of drawings that suggested his 8-year-old daughter had somehow witnessed something terrible. Something that had branded itself so deeply in her young mind that she couldn't stop recreating it on paper. Edmund moved to her desk, where more drawings lay scattered like evidence at a crime scene. These were different, more detailed, more sophisticated. The man in the dark coat had a face now, though it was obscured by shadows and angry black scribbles. The woman on the ground wore a blue dress, the same shade of blue that Catherine favored for official appearances. The watching child's face showed an expression that no 8-year-old should ever wear, a hollow-eyed awareness that made Edmund's hands shake. He heard footsteps in the corridor and quickly gathered the drawings into a neat stack, his training in crisis management taking over. Catherine's voice echoed from the nursery next door, asking Lydia about her morning lessons. The normalcy of it felt surreal against the horror of what lay spread across their daughter's desk. "Miss Hartwell," he called softly, and the governess appeared immediately in the doorway, her face pale with worry. "When did you first notice these drawings, Miss Hartwell?" "Last week, Your Highness. I thought perhaps she'd seen something on television or heard the staff talking about some news program. Children pick up things, you know. But then I found more of them, hidden places, under her mattress, inside her jewelry box, even folded up in her prayer book." Edmund's jaw tightened. "Has she said anything? Mentioned bad dreams? Asked unusual questions?" "That's just it, sir. She's been perfectly normal. Happy, chatty, excited about her writing lessons. It's only when she thinks no one is looking that she draws these things." The implications hit Edmund like a physical blow. If Lydia was creating these images in secret, hiding them throughout her room, then whatever had inspired them was significant enough that she felt the need for secrecy. Children didn't hide innocent drawings. They displayed them proudly, demanded attention for their artwork, used their creations to communicate with the adults in their lives. But these drawings felt different. They felt like confessions. Edmund moved to the window, looking out over the palace gardens where Lydia often played. The grounds stretched for acres, manicured, and perfect, surrounded by walls that had protected the royal family for generations. Nothing dangerous could penetrate this sanctuary. Nothing violent could touch his daughter within these walls. Yet the evidence in his hands suggested otherwise. He thought about Lydia's behavior over the past few weeks. Had there been signs he'd missed? She'd been quieter during dinner lately, pushing food around her plate instead of chattering about her day. She'd asked to sleep with her bedroom door open, claiming she liked to hear the hallway sounds. And twice he'd found her standing at her window in the middle of the night, staring out at the gardens with an intensity that seemed unusual for a child her age. At the time, he'd attributed these behaviors to normal childhood phases. 8-year-olds went through periods of change, moments of sudden maturity that caught parents off guard. He'd been proud of how thoughtful she was becoming, how observant and quiet and careful. Now those same behaviors took on a sinister cast. Edmund sat heavily in Lydia's small chair, the drawings spread before him like pieces of a puzzle he was afraid to solve. Each image told the same story, but with slight variations that suggested multiple viewings of the same event. In some drawings, the man in the dark coat held something in his hand, a long, thin object that could have been a stick or a tool or something worse. In others, there were additional figures in the background, watching from various hiding places. The most disturbing detail was the consistency of the watching child. In every single drawing, the small figure with yellow hair was positioned as an observer, never a participant, never in danger, but always present, always witnessing. The child's expression never changed, that same hollow-eyed stare that suggested knowledge no child should possess. Edmund's phone buzzed against his chest, making him jump. A text from his private secretary reminded him of his morning meeting with the Prime Minister. Normal life intruding on this surreal discovery. He was expected to smile and discuss trade agreements and diplomatic protocols while his daughter's secret artwork suggested she had witnessed something that could shatter their carefully constructed world. He gathered the drawings again, his hands steadier now that shock was giving way to determination. Whatever Lydia had seen, whatever these images represented, he would get to the bottom of it. But he needed to be smart about his approach. Children were delicate creatures, and traumatic memories could be easily damaged by clumsy adult intervention. The sound of Lydia's laughter drifted from the nursery, bright and innocent, and completely at odds with the darkness spread across her desk. Edmund felt a chill run down his spine. How could a child who created such disturbing images sound so completely normal? How could she compartmentalize whatever had happened to her so completely that she could laugh and play and attend her lessons as if nothing had changed? Unless the drawings weren't about something that had happened to her at all. The thought hit him with sudden, terrible clarity. What if Lydia hadn't been the victim of whatever scene she was recreating? What if she had simply been an observer, a witness to something that adults assumed she hadn't seen or understood? Edmund stood abruptly, the small chair scraping against the floor. He needed to think, to plan, to figure out how to approach this without causing more trauma to his daughter. But first, he needed to secure these drawings, to make sure no one else saw them until he understood what they meant. As he moved toward the door, one final drawing caught his eye. This one was different from the others, smaller, more careful, done in pencil rather than crayon. It showed the same scene, but from a different angle. The man in the dark coat was turned slightly, enough that his profile was visible, and Edmund's blood ran cold as he recognized something familiar in the rough lines of the figure's face. The man in Lydia's drawings looked remarkably like someone Edmund knew, someone who had access to the palace, someone who had been present during several recent family gatherings, someone who would never have been suspected of anything worse than social climbing and political ambition. Edmund clutched the drawing to his chest, his mind racing through implications he didn't want to consider. If his suspicions were correct, then Lydia's secret artwork wasn't just evidence of childhood trauma. It was evidence of something far more dangerous. Something that could destroy everything his family had built. Something that could put them all in danger. The laughter from the nursery seemed to mock him now, highlighting the terrible contrast between his daughter's apparent innocence and the knowledge she carried without understanding its significance. Edmund knew he had reached a crossroads. He could pretend he had never seen these drawings, convince himself they were products of an overactive imagination, let life continue in its comfortable, predictable patterns. Or he could acknowledge that his 8-year-old daughter had somehow become witness to something that adults had either missed or chosen to ignore. As he stood in the pink-tinged morning light of Lydia's bedroom, surrounded by the detritus of childhood and the evidence of something much darker, Edmund made his choice. He would find out what his daughter had seen, no matter where that knowledge led him, no matter what it cost his family, no matter how much he wished he could simply close the door and pretend none of this had ever happened. 3 days had passed since Edmund's discovery in Lydia's room, and he had barely slept. The drawings were locked in his private safe now, but their images haunted him during every quiet moment. He had become a detective in his own home, watching staff members with new suspicion, analyzing every interaction through the lens of his daughter's terrible artwork. Dr. Sarah Melbourne sat across from his desk, her credentials in child psychology impressive enough to warrant the extreme discretion Edmund had demanded for this consultation. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and steady hands, the sort of person who inspired confidence without demanding attention. "Your Highness," she said gently, "I need to be very clear about something before we proceed. If Princess Lydia has witnessed violence, attempting to extract those memories without proper care could cause significantly more trauma than the original event." Edmund nodded, though every fiber of his being wanted to shake his daughter until she explained every detail of what she had seen. "I understand. But, Dr. Melbourne, these drawings, they're so detailed, so specific. She's been creating them for weeks, possibly months. Whatever she witnessed, it's not going away on its own." Dr. Melbourne opened her leather portfolio and withdrew several books filled with examples of children's artwork. Trauma manifests differently in every child. Some become withdrawn and refuse to discuss what happened. Others, like Princess Lydia appears to be doing, recreate the traumatic event repeatedly through art or play. It's actually a healthy coping mechanism. Her mind is trying to process something it doesn't understand. "But the secrecy," Edmund pressed. "Why would she hide the drawings if she's simply processing trauma? Children are remarkably intuitive about adult emotions. If Princess Lydia senses that what she witnessed would upset the adults in her life, she might hide her attempts to understand it. She's protecting you as much as herself." The thought that his 8-year-old daughter was trying to protect him from something she had witnessed made Edmund's chest tight with grief. Children should never have to carry such burdens alone. Dr. Melbourne leaned forward slightly. "I'd like to spend some time with Princess Lydia today. Nothing formal, nothing that would seem like an interrogation. Perhaps I could observe her during her regular activities, maybe engage her in some art therapy. Children often reveal more through play than through direct questioning." Edmund agreed, though the idea of anyone probing his daughter's mind made him deeply uncomfortable. But Dr. Melbourne came highly recommended, and her approach seemed gentle enough that Lydia wouldn't realize she was being evaluated. While Dr. Melbourne spent the afternoon with Lydia, Edmund turned his attention to the palace staff schedules. If his suspicions about the man in the drawings were correct, there should be evidence, security logs, visitor records, staff assignments that would place the right person in the right location at the right time. Head of Security Marcus Webb entered Edmund's private study at precisely 2 o'clock, his military bearing evident in every step. Webb had served the royal family for 15 years, and Edmund trusted him completely. But trust, Edmund was learning, was a luxury he could no longer afford carelessly. "Webb," Edmund said without preamble, "I need you to review all security footage from the past 6 months. Focus on any incidents involving staff or visitors that might have been unusual. Anything that involved raised voices, physical altercations, or situations that a child might have misinterpreted as violence." Webb's expression didn't change, but Edmund caught the slight narrowing of his eyes. "May I ask what has prompted this review, Your Highness?" Edmund had prepared for this question, but the words still felt strange in his mouth. "Princess Lydia has been having nightmares. Nothing specific, but Dr. Melbourne thinks she may have witnessed something that frightened her. I want to identify what that might have been so we can address it properly. It wasn't entirely a lie, but it wasn't the complete truth either." Edmund was becoming uncomfortably familiar with the space between honesty and deception. Webb nodded crisply. "I'll begin immediately. Should I focus on any particular areas of the palace?" Edmund thought about the angles in Lydia's drawings, the positioning of the watching child, the gardens, particularly the areas visible from the second-floor windows, and the library corridor. Princess Lydia spends considerable time there with her tutors. "Very good, sir. I'll have a preliminary report by tomorrow morning." After Webb left, Edmund found himself standing at his own window, looking out at the same gardens his daughter observed from her room. The landscape looked peaceful, manicured, safe. But Edmund was beginning to understand that safety was often an illusion, and the most dangerous threats were frequently the ones that came from within trusted circles. His phone buzzed with a text from Catherine, asking if he would be joining them for dinner. The normalcy of the question felt jarring against the investigation he was conducting in secret. How long could he continue this parallel existence? Loving father and husband on the surface, suspicious investigator underneath. Dr. Melbourne found him in the library an hour later, her expression carefully neutral. "How did it go?" Edmund asked, though her face already suggested the news wouldn't be comforting. "Princess Lydia is a remarkable child," Dr. Melbourne began, settling into the chair across from his desk. "Intelligent, articulate, emotionally mature for her age. And she's carrying a significant psychological burden." Edmund's hands clenched involuntarily. "What did she tell you?" "Nothing directly. But during our art session, she created several more drawings. The same themes, the same figures. And when I asked her about the pictures, she said something very interesting. She said the drawings were her secret job." "Secret job?" Dr. Melbourne nodded. When I asked what she meant, she explained that sometimes children see things that adults don't notice. She said it was her job to remember those things because adults are too busy to pay attention. The implications of this statement hit Edmund like a physical blow. His daughter hadn't just witnessed something traumatic. She had appointed herself the keeper of that knowledge because she believed the adults in her life weren't capable of seeing what she had seen. "Dr. Melbourne, in your professional opinion, did Princess Lydia witness actual violence? Or is this a manifestation of some other psychological stress?" Dr. Melbourne was quiet for a long moment, choosing her words carefully. The consistency and detail of her imagery suggest she witnessed something real. The emotional content of her artwork indicates genuine trauma, not fantasy. And her behavior, the secrecy, the sense of responsibility, the way she's compartmentalized the experience, all of this points to a child who has seen something significant that she doesn't know how to process. Edmund felt the last of his hope that this might be a misunderstanding slip away. His daughter had witnessed something terrible, something that had been happening right under his nose, in his own home, where she should have been completely safe. "There's something else," Dr. Melbourne continued. "During our session, Princess Lydia asked me if I knew any police officers. When I asked why, she said she thought police officers were good at solving puzzles, and she had a puzzle that was too hard for her to solve alone." The revelation that his 8-year-old daughter was essentially trying to report a crime through art therapy made Edmund's vision blur with rage. Someone had put his child in the position of being a witness to violence, and now she was struggling to figure out how to get help for whatever she had seen. "Did she say anything else about this puzzle?" "She said it involved someone who was supposed to be good but was actually bad. And she was worried about telling adults because she wasn't sure they would believe her, since the person who was bad was someone everyone liked." Edmund's suspicions crystallized into near certainty. The man in Lydia's drawings wasn't a stranger who had somehow penetrated palace security. It was someone with authorized access, someone trusted, someone who would never be suspected of violence because their position or reputation placed them above suspicion. Someone everyone liked. Dr. Melbourne gathered her materials, her expression compassionate, but professional. "Your Highness, I recommend we proceed very carefully from here. Princess Lydia needs to feel safe enough to share what she knows, but pushing too hard could cause her to retreat entirely. She's already carrying the burden of believing she's the only one who sees the truth. If we handle this wrong, she could end up feeling responsible for whatever consequences result from her disclosure." After Dr. Melbourne left, Edmund sat alone in the library, surrounded by thousands of books that contained every kind of knowledge except the specific information he desperately needed. His daughter was essentially trying to solve a crime using crayons and construction paper, while he was conducting an investigation using security footage and staff records. The irony wasn't lost on him that an 8-year-old had noticed something that the entire adult security apparatus of the palace had missed. Webb returned as the sun was setting, carrying a tablet loaded with security footage and a thick folder of incident reports. "Your Highness," Webb said, his expression grim. "I think I've found what you're looking for." Edmund's pulse quickened. "Show me." Webb set the tablet on Edmund's desk and pulled up a video file dated 3 weeks earlier. The footage showed the garden area outside the library windows, filmed from a security camera mounted on the palace's east wing. This is from a Tuesday evening, approximately 7:30. Most of the staff had gone home for the day, and the family was having dinner in the private dining room. The video began playing, showing the peaceful garden scene in the soft light of early evening. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then, a figure appeared at the edge of the frame, a man in a dark coat, walking quickly along the garden path. Edmund leaned forward, studying the figure. Even in the grainy security footage, the man's gait was familiar. "Keep watching," Webb said quietly. A second figure appeared, a woman in a blue dress, walking from the opposite direction. The two figures met near the center of the garden, directly below the windows of the second floor where Lydia's room was located. The conversation that followed was clearly heated, though the audio pickup wasn't clear enough to make out specific words. The woman gestured emphatically, backing away from the man as she spoke. The man followed her, his posture increasingly aggressive. And then, with shocking suddenness, the man raised his hand and struck the woman across the face. She fell to the ground, her blue dress spreading around her like the petals of a bruised flower. The man stood over her for several seconds, then looked around quickly before kneeling beside her still form. Edmund's breath caught in his throat. The scene was playing out exactly as Lydia had depicted it in her drawings. The man in the dark coat, the woman in blue on the ground, the violence that had erupted in what should have been a safe space. "Who are they?" Edmund asked, though a sick feeling in his stomach suggested he already knew the answer. Webb paused the video and enhanced the image. The woman's face was partially visible now, and Edmund recognized her immediately. Margaret Thornfield, one of Catherine's ladies-in-waiting. A woman who had been with the family for over 3 years, trusted with intimate details of their lives, given access to every part of the palace. The man's face was still partially obscured, but as Webb adjusted the contrast, his features became clearer. Lord Richard Ashworth, Catherine's private secretary, a man Edmund had known for years, had dined with, had trusted with sensitive family information. A man who had been present at family gatherings, who had access to every part of the palace, who would never have been suspected of violence because his position placed him above suspicion. A man everyone liked. Edmund stared at the frozen image on the screen, his mind struggling to reconcile the person he knew with the figure he was watching commit assault in his own garden. Lord Ashworth was cultured, educated, well-connected. He came from an established family, had impeccable references, had never given any indication of being capable of violence. "What happened to Margaret?" Edmund asked, dreading the answer. Webb's expression grew even more grim. "She called in sick the next day, said she had a family emergency, and needed to take immediate leave. We haven't seen her since." The pieces were falling into place with terrible clarity. Margaret had discovered something about Lord Ashworth, or had threatened to expose something. They had met in the garden to discuss it privately. The conversation had escalated to violence. And an 8-year-old princess, looking out her bedroom window at what should have been a peaceful garden scene, had witnessed it all. Now Margaret was gone, and Lydia was left carrying the burden of what she had seen, trying to solve a crime with colored pencils because she didn't know how else to get help. Edmund stood abruptly, pacing to the window that looked out over the scene of the crime. "Where is Lord Ashworth now?" "He's scheduled to meet with Her Majesty tomorrow morning regarding the upcoming state visit," Webb replied. "Should I detain him?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Edmund could order Ashworth's immediate arrest, but doing so would create a scandal that could damage the monarchy's reputation. More importantly, it would force Lydia into the position of being a witness in a criminal investigation, something that could traumatize her further. But allowing Ashworth to continue operating within the palace, to have continued access to the family, was unthinkable. "Find Margaret Thornfield," Edmund said finally. "Whatever it takes, find her. I need to know what she discovered about Ashworth, and I need to know if she's safe. And increase security around Princess Lydia immediately, but do it discreetly. I don't want her to realize she's being protected." As Webb prepared to leave, Edmund called him back. "Webb, how long has Lord Ashworth had access to the second floor of the palace?" "Since he was appointed as Her Majesty's private secretary 3 years ago, sir. He has clearance for all areas except the private family quarters." 3 years. Long enough to establish trust, to become part of the furniture, to be overlooked and underestimated. Long enough to believe he was untouchable. But he had made one crucial mistake. He had committed violence within sight of a princess who noticed everything and forgot nothing. Edmund returned to his desk, his mind already working on the next phase of his investigation. Tomorrow, he would have to face Lord Ashworth across a conference table, knowing what the man was capable of, while pretending that nothing had changed. And, somewhere in the palace, his 8-year-old daughter was still carrying her terrible secret, still trying to solve a puzzle that adults had failed to notice. But, not for much longer. Edmund opened his laptop and began typing a coded message to his most trusted contacts in law enforcement. By morning, he would have resources in place to investigate Lord Ashworth thoroughly, to track down Margaret Thornfield, and to ensure that justice was served without exposing Lydia to further trauma. The man everyone liked was about to discover that princes could be far more dangerous enemies than he had ever imagined, especially when they were protecting their children. The morning air in Edmund's private study felt electric with tension as he prepared for the most challenging performance of his life. In 20 minutes, Lord Richard Ashworth would arrive for his scheduled meeting with Catherine, completely unaware that his crimes had been discovered by an 8-year-old witness and captured on palace security cameras. Detective Chief Inspector Patricia Hayes sat across from Edmund's desk, her sharp eyes reviewing the evidence they had compiled over the past 48 hours. DCI Hayes specialized in cases involving domestic violence and had been brought in under absolute secrecy to handle the investigation. "Your Highness," she said, closing the file, "we've located Margaret Thornfield. She's alive, but she's been staying with relatives in Scotland, too frightened to return to London. She's agreed to provide a full statement, and her injuries from the assault are well documented by the hospital where she sought treatment." Relief flooded through Edmund. Margaret was safe. That knowledge lifted a weight he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. "What has she told you about Lord Ashworth?" DCI Hayes consulted her notes. According to Ms. Thornfield, she discovered that Lord Ashworth had been selling information about the royal family's private schedule to tabloid journalists. When she confronted him about it, he initially tried to bribe her to keep quiet. When she refused, he became violent. The betrayal cut deep. Edmund had trusted Ashworth with intimate family details, had included him in private conversations, had brought him into the inner circle of palace life. And Ashworth had been selling those confidences to the highest bidder. The assault in the garden was his attempt to silence her permanently. DCI Hayes continued. Miss Thornfield believes he would have killed her if she hadn't managed to convince him that she had already told others about his activities. She fled that night, and has been in hiding ever since. Edmund's hands clenched involuntarily. The thought that his daughter had witnessed what could have been an attempted murder made his vision blur with rage. But he forced himself to focus on the present moment. Today, they would end Ashworth's ability to hurt anyone else. "The plan remains the same," DCI Hayes said. "You'll conduct the meeting as scheduled. I'll be positioned in the adjacent room, listening to the entire conversation. When Lord Ashworth believes he's safe, we'll confront him with the evidence. His reaction should tell us everything we need to know about his guilt." A soft knock interrupted their conversation. Webb appeared in the doorway, his expression carefully neutral. "Your Highness, Lord Ashworth has arrived. He's waiting in the blue drawing room." Edmund stood, straightening his jacket and forcing his expression into the mask of polite professionalism he had perfected over years of royal duty. But beneath the surface, every nerve was alert, every instinct focused on the confrontation ahead. The blue drawing room had always been one of Edmund's favorite spaces in the palace, with its elegant furnishings and view of the rose garden. Now it felt like a stage set for a drama he had never wanted to perform. Lord Ashworth stood as Edmund entered, his smile warm and familiar. He was a man in his early 40s, impeccably dressed, with the kind of refined features that suggested generations of good breeding. Looking at him now, knowing what Edmund knew, it was impossible to imagine this polished gentleman striking a woman with enough force to knock her to the ground. But that was exactly what made him so dangerous. "Your Highness," Ashworth said, bowing slightly. "I trust you're well. And Princess Lydia? I heard she had been feeling under the weather recently." The casual mention of his daughter's name made Edmund's jaw tighten, but he managed to keep his voice level. "Lydia is fine, thank you. Please sit. We have much to discuss regarding the state visit." For the next 15 minutes, they conducted a perfectly normal business meeting. Ashworth presented schedules, discussed security arrangements, offered suggestions for the visiting dignitaries' entertainment. He was professional, thorough, completely at ease. Edmund found himself studying the man's hands as he gestured, trying to reconcile these manicured fingers with the violence he had witnessed on the security footage. These were the hands that had struck Margaret Thornfield, that had sold private family information to tabloid journalists, that had violated every trust placed in them. Lord Ashworth, Edmund said finally, I've been reviewing our security protocols recently, and I have some concerns about information leaks to the press. Ashworth's expression didn't change, but Edmund caught the slightest stiffening of his posture. Information leaks, Your Highness? I'm not aware of any specific incidents. Really? Because we've noticed some concerning patterns. Private family activities appearing in tabloid reports with remarkable accuracy. Details that only inner staff would have access to. Now Ashworth was definitely uncomfortable, though he was doing his best to hide it. The palace employs many people, sir. Any number of staff members could potentially. Could they? Edmund interrupted, his voice sharpening. Because the information that's been leaked has been very specific. Details about Princess Lydia's schedule, about Catherine's private appointments, about security arrangements that are known only to a handful of senior staff. Ashworth's smile was beginning to look strained. Your Highness, I assure you that I take the confidentiality of royal business very seriously. If there have been leaks, I'm as concerned about them as you are. Edmund stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where Ashworth had assaulted Margaret Thornfield. Speaking of confidentiality, we haven't seen Margaret Thornfield recently. I understand she had a family emergency. The silence that followed was heavy with tension. When Edmund turned back to face Ashworth, the man's complexion had gone pale. Yes, Ashworth said carefully. A sudden illness in her family required her immediate attention. How unfortunate. I hope she wasn't injured by whatever emergency occurred. Ashworth's hands were gripping the arms of his chair now, his knuckles white with tension. Injured? Why would you assume she was injured? Edmund walked back to his desk and pressed a button on the intercom. Webb, would you please ask DCI Hayes to join us? The color drained completely from Ashworth's face. DCI Hayes? Your Highness, I don't understand, don't you? Edmund's voice was ice-cold now, all pretense of politeness abandoned. Let me help clarify things for you. The door opened, and DCI Hayes entered, followed by Webb and two plainclothes police officers. Ashworth's eyes darted between them, his breathing becoming rapid and shallow. Lord Richard Ashworth, DCI Hayes said formally, you are under arrest for the assault of Margaret Thornfield and for violations of the Official Secrets Act. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defense if you do not mention when questioned something which you later rely on in court. Ashworth shot to his feet, his composure finally cracking. This is ridiculous. You have no evidence. Margaret Thornfield is a disgruntled employee who, we have security footage of the entire incident, Edmund said quietly. We have Margaret's medical records documenting her injuries. And we have 3 years of bank records showing payments from tabloid newspapers directly into your personal accounts. The fight went out of Ashworth all at once. He sank back into his chair, his face collapsing into lines of defeat and desperation. You don't understand, he said, his voice breaking. The gambling debts, they were going to kill me. I needed the money. I never meant for anyone to get hurt. But someone did get hurt, Edmund replied. Margaret Thornfield was hospitalized because of your violence. And my 8-year-old daughter witnessed the entire attack from her bedroom window. Ashworth's face went white. Princess Lydia, she saw everything. She's been drawing pictures of what she witnessed for weeks, trying to understand what she saw, trying to figure out how to get help for Margaret. A child had to carry that burden because adults failed to notice what was happening right under their noses. As the officers prepared to take Ashworth away, he turned back to Edmund with tears in his eyes. Your Highness, please. I never wanted any of this to happen. The money was supposed to be harmless, just schedule information, nothing important. But when Margaret found out, you tried to silence her permanently, DCI Hayes finished. And you would have succeeded if not for the courage of an 8-year-old princess who refused to let injustice go unnoticed. After Ashworth was led away in handcuffs, Edmund found himself alone in the blue drawing room, surrounded by the elegant furnishings that had witnessed this morning's drama. The relief he felt was overwhelming, but it was tempered by the knowledge that his daughter was still carrying the psychological burden of what she had witnessed. Dr. Melbourne was waiting in his study when he returned, her expression hopeful. Princess Lydia knows that her puzzle has been solved, she reported. I told her that the police officer she wanted to meet had looked at her drawings and had been able to help the woman who was hurt. She seems tremendously relieved. How is she handling all of this? Better than you might expect. Children are remarkably resilient when they feel heard and believed. The fact that her observations led to justice being served will actually help her process the trauma more effectively than if the crime had gone unpunished. Edmund felt a surge of pride in his daughter's courage, mixed with sadness that she had been forced to grow up so quickly. That evening, Edmund knocked softly on Lydia's bedroom door. She was sitting at her desk, but instead of drawing scenes of violence, she was working on a picture of horses running through a meadow. "Papa," she said, jumping up to hug him. "Dr. Melbourne said the bad man can't hurt anyone anymore." Edmund held her close, marveling at her resilience. "That's right, sweetheart. You were very brave to notice what others missed. You helped save someone who needed help." Lydia pulled back to look at him seriously. "I knew adults would figure it out eventually, but I thought maybe my drawings could help them figure it out faster." "They did help. Very much. But, Lydia, if you ever see something that frightens you again, you can always come to me or Mama right away. You don't have to carry secrets alone." She nodded solemnly. "I know. But, Papa, sometimes children see things that adults miss because we're smaller and quieter. Maybe that's why we're supposed to watch out for each other." Edmund smiled, struck by his daughter's wisdom. "Maybe you're right. Maybe we all need to watch out for each other." As he tucked Lydia into bed that night, Edmund reflected on the lessons of the past week. A child's innocent observations had uncovered corruption and violence that sophisticated security systems had missed. An 8-year-old's sense of justice had led to the downfall of a man who had betrayed every trust placed in him. Most importantly, his daughter had learned that her voice mattered, that her observations were valuable, and that speaking up about injustice was not just acceptable, but necessary. The drawings that had terrified him a week ago were now safely locked away as evidence in a criminal case. But the courage and integrity that had created those drawings would stay with Lydia for the rest of her life. As Edmund turned off the lights in his daughter's room, he realized that while he had failed to protect her from witnessing violence, she had protected others through her unwillingness to ignore what she had seen. Sometimes, he thought, children really did have the clearest vision of right and wrong. And sometimes, the most important investigations were conducted with crayons and construction paper by 8-year-old princesses who understood that silence in the face of injustice was the greatest crime of all. In the weeks that followed, Margaret Thornfield returned to the palace, her physical injuries healed, and her courage restored by the knowledge that justice had been served. Lord Ashworth was sentenced to 5 years in prison for assault and violations of the Official Secrets Act. The palace implemented new security protocols, but, more importantly, Edmund established a tradition of weekly conversations with Lydia about anything she might have observed that seemed unusual or troubling. These talks became some of his favorite moments, reminding him that wisdom often came from the most unexpected sources. And Princess Lydia continued to draw, but now her artwork depicted horses and castles and stick figure families, the innocent creations of a child who had learned that speaking truth to power was not just a right, but a responsibility. The blue drawing room was redecorated, but Edmund kept one reminder of the events that had unfolded there. A small, carefully framed drawing of horses running through a meadow, created by an 8-year-old princess who had solved a crime with colored pencils and shown the adults around her that even the smallest voices deserved to be heard.